Hi, party people. It's Olori Lolade Skintili Monies here with a Black Genius Unplugged edition. We're bringing back these amazing conversations that we used to have with visionary creatives and thinkers and makers and CEOs, and really just easing back into a rhythm of conversation on things that matter for us as Black folk, especially matters of liberation. Hi, Lakon. I'm going to wait for Dr. Jennifer Pierre, who's going to be joining us today. I'm waiting for her to join. But she was one of our first Black Genius interviewees. She is a naturopathic doctor. She's been my doctor at different times. And just one of the people who very much inspires me, very much is just absolutely visionary and just doing amazing work at the center of public health, at the intersection of public health, wellness, and functional medicine, naturopathic medicine. So please help me welcome Dr. Pierre. I'm gonna add you, Dr. Pierre. I don't know. I think you have to request to join the video because I'm not even sure how to. There we go. There we go. She comes. I think it worked. Um, yeah, just conversations to help you. We're gonna be talking about Black wellness as we go into the wintertime. Hey, Dr. Pierre. I can't hear you. Are you muted?
No.
Okay, now I can hear you.
Okay.
Maybe it's late. You look pretty.
Thank
I'm loving the
you.
face.
So do you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for doing this. Thank you for, jumping on my Haitian live series. I feel like
I wish I had my flag.
y'all are just the most radical people I know, I guess. I'm sitting there.
It's in the history.
It definitely is in the history. I'm sitting there like, who would I really love to talk to? And literally everybody who came up was Haitian. It was crazy. So I'm glad that we get to do this. It's been a while since we had a conversation like this. We did your Black Genius back in 2020.
I know. And at that time we were steeped into the pandemic, and we were just talking about, how to manage through the pandemic and what that was going to look like.
Yeah. Literally at the height of the pandemic, talking about, Black wellness in a sense at that time too. And it's something that's been on my mind. So, of course, Noirpress, everything that we do is about liberation. And for me, liberation is spiritual. We spoke to Martine last week thereabouts. Liberation is physical health. Liberation is through technology. There's so many dimensions to our liberation. And so the work that you do in helping people to be safe and healthy in our bodies is a fundamental part of our liberation. And, your work has changed since then, right? Yeah. So from 2020, we were kind of seeing all kinds of, seeing all types of folks dealing with all types of issues. You've honed in a bit more. You're building your own platform. So talk about how your practice has changed since 2020.
Yeah, it has changed a lot. Back in 2020, I had just left the practice that I was working at, which I was also managing, and I went out on my own. And I'm so happy I did that. It was such an amazing experience to do that, and just confirmation of what I knew I could do, but just really jumping out there and betting on myself. So I transitioned from managing that practice to owning my own. And during the time, I also decided that I was going to focus mostly on women's health. That's always been my passion. I've been working with women for a really long time, almost 20 years. I started out my career in public health. Back then I was, so eager and excited to start my career. My first career is in public health. So my first job in public health was a prenatal health educator at Brooklyn Hospital. And I loved that job. I loved working with pregnant women and just assisting them through the process. And it's so ironic because so much has changed. At that time, I also thought about becoming a doula. And nobody knew what doulas were back then. This is like 2003, 2004, and now doulas are hot. But
now you got a whole doula certification.
Right?
You're going to start doula degree programs.
Erica, I do, so I was just always been really fascinated with fertility and just assisting women get pregnant and just supporting them through that process. And then my journey kind of moved along and expanded into learning about naturopathic medicine. And that just it blew my mind because I always wanted to become a doctor. I just took issue with how medicine was transforming. When I was little, I felt like doctors still spent time with you and things like that. And as I got into high school and college, the system changed a lot. And there wasn't so much of a focus on prevention. I always joke, I don't know why I was so aware of all these things at such a young age, but like at 16, I was introduced to yoga and I was like, wow, this is amazing. And then
How introduced to yoga? What was
in
that introduction?
school, so
Wow.
I went to a Catholic school in New York, in Uniondale, Long Island. And for dance class one day, we would have like regular gym and then 30 minutes of gym. And in the gym, the 30-minute sessions, we would have different forms of dance. So one day they introduced yoga and I just naturally took to it. And who knew, like 10 years later, I would become a yoga instructor. So I always joke that I've had like many lives, and it was really in my 20s, like this self-discovery of trying to learn more about healing, really. And as I learned so much about the system of healthcare and the business of healthcare and public health, it kept pushing.
Oh, come back, come back. See if I can just take a few deep breaths as we await Dr. Pierre's reconnection. She's still with us. Hi, Lorna. Has you requesting again? Hi, Lorna. Hi, MG. If you're still with us. Oh. I'm trying to re-add her. So, but I hope y'all got the gist.
What
Okay.
happened?
I don't know. I would expect I would have had internet issues before you,
What,
but
what happened? I
it
don't
just kicked
know.
you off. It
Oh,
just kicked you off.
okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'm back.
You were saying how you didn't like the way
Yeah,
that the
so I was saying that I was just I was on this journey of self-discovery and just really learning more about healing. And I will say, you mentioned being Haitian. You're never too far from that. My grandparents were both farmers. And my parents grew up in a rural community in Haiti, and it shaped how I grew up. Like herbs were not foreign to me. Like many people from the Caribbean and Africa and indigenous communities, you grow up learning about different plants and herbs that are good for your stomach if you're having digestive issues, or my mom would do like a seasonal cleanse in the beginning of the school year. Yeah, because that's when she grew up, that's what her father would do. And so they would have a seasonal cleanse in the fall with different herbs, and then, kind of like paring down on your diet. So I say a lot of times, and then, also in that journey, becoming a vegetarian. So my mom says, when I was a baby, she ate so much fruit and vegetables. And so I think this is kind of something that was brewing before, I even understood it. And, people ask me sometimes, like, are other people in your family vegetarians? Or, how did you, at 16 years old, adopting yoga, and just how did this happen? I honestly don't know. It
divine
wasn't really,
divine alignment.
yeah, it wasn't really any one particular thing. It was just the more I learned, the more I just, just sucked it all up. And then I also had a role where I was a manager at the vitamin shop, also in my 20s, and it was a really good experience of learning more about the supplement industry. And so a lot of the things I was self-teaching myself about herbs, or things that I just knew growing up about certain herbs, I really honed in. And then now went to naturopathic medical school, and that just pulled it all together. So the prevention, you know, health promotion, learning officially about herbs and the mechanism of action, how they interact with drugs and how you can use them with drugs, or, you know, and dosing. And so I felt very confident at that point in, you know, kind of pulling it all together. So, so the journey, you know, I always say it started so long ago, but it always focused in on women, and women's health. And I'm just so passionate about helping women and you know, just fertility and just how we can take care of ourselves, because women, we're the ones who are really, you know, running how the family takes care of their health. You know, a lot of times when I've had male patients, it's usually their wife, their mom, their sister, someone who, you know, introduced them to, you know, this medicine, or just wanting to take care of themselves better. So I just feel like as women, you know, we're kind of pushed into this role, but because we're nurturers, we kind of take to it so naturally. And the more we learn about health, the more we can share with our families and communities.
Wow, that's so deep and so on point. And I'm thinking about your transition in the pandemic, and
Yeah.
just, you know, curious about that transition. Like curious
Yeah.
about how we've talked about how, you know, you're very innovative in the medical world, right? They don't like computers, they don't like virtual stuff, right? So the pandemic happened, everybody had to switch to virtual.
Yeah.
And so practice was not really ready for the innovation, and you were good, and you were kind of,
Yeah.
you know, so talk about that. And then
Yeah.
how, let's talk about that. And I want to talk about like what you've seen as far as women's health, but first on the transition.
So I love and adore technology. Something that I think people don't really know about me is that also in my early 20s, I was a hair blogger. And during that time, so natural hair blogger, so I was just sharing information about natural hair, how I take care of my hair, natural products. And at that time is when I started teaching myself HTML. So I created my own website, and I posted photos on there. Back then, there was this site for that natural hair bloggers used to post their photos called Folky. And so I had a page on there, and I really love technology. So I have created different websites and tore them down. I've done blogs and tore them down. So I've always loved technology, but never knew I could embrace it. Like my brother's an engineer. I have a lot of people in my family who are engineers, but I didn't really recognize that I had that kind of like natural kind of
Propensity.
yeah, to technology until I would say probably about 5 years ago. And when I was in school, I learned about telemedicine. I have a friend who was very interested in doing that. And I was interested in it, but I didn't really think it was feasible. I didn't think the public was ready. And it just so happened that the pandemic made it so that so many people were just, they had no choice. So when a lot of doctors were upset or scared of technology, I was lucky to come into medicine in a time where even when I was in school, I never used paper charts. It was always digital. So I kept telling the practices that I was working at, everything needs to be digital. It needs to be digital. Why aren't we making this digital? And so what I would do, since they didn't want to do it for the whole practice, is I would just make sure front desk would scan my charts in. And if there was no time for that, I would do it myself, because I wanted to have access to the charts no matter what. You know, a lot of times if you're a doctor, you know, like 30 to 40% of your time is spent charting. So I wanted to be able to have my chart so I could take home and I wouldn't have to be at the practice until 9, 10 o'clock at night. So for me, I saw technology as a way to have more balance, work-life balance. And, you know, so when the pandemic came, I had already been using an EMR, electronic medical record system, that had video chat ingrained into it. So that was the first big step. And my patients already were digital in that system, and it's HIPAA compliant and all of that. So everything's pretty secure. So they were kind of shocked. Like, a lot of my patients were like, really? Like, you can still keep my appointment? And I was like, yeah, we'll send you the link, just hop on. I played around with different systems, like, people know Zoom was being used and all that, but the EMR that I use already had the video chat, and it works really well. Never really had any issues with it. So that was a big part of it. And then when I left the practice in August 2020, in the height of the pandemic. And September, I officially launched September 2020. So some of my patients came with me. One of the doctors who I'd hired for the practice came with me, and I started the practice that way. And when you ask about evolution, really, I would say I really honed in. I mentioned the women's health piece, but also just playing around with my practice model. So right now, I do one-to-one patient care. So basically, initial intake and follow-up visits. And now I'm transitioning into packages. So I'll be creating packages and potentially membership models. And the reason why I decided to move into that is because I find that as much as we would like that our patients are really ready to make behavioral change, what I've found is they need a lot more support. So if you're seeing somebody for an intake and you don't see them again for like a month, you're really expecting that in that month that they're going to do everything that you advise, right? And as much as my heart would love that would be the case, what happens is they come back and it's like, what happened? Like, what happened
That
to
happened
you?
to me. That happened to me. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's not judgment, because a lot of times, I recognize that patients think you're judging them. It's not judgment. I've seen everything. I always tell people that I've seen everything and I've heard everything. And it's taught me a lot about being human, and as a result, like, we need support. We need support. I need support. Everybody needs support. And so being in this human body, you recognize that I see myself in my patients. I see myself in the past. I see myself in the future. Like, I see all these different sides that present themselves, and nothing is foreign to me. So I'm moving into that because I really just want them to have more support. And what I mean by that is, one of my dear friends, Shanyeri, she is a health coach. And so I'm bringing her on. So I'm giving the medical advice. I'm going over the labs. Obviously, I've been trained in nutrition. That's one of the biggest differences in being a naturopathic physician versus being a medical doctor. We're trained in nutrition. So I'm very well versed in that, but it's a lot of work to do the labs, to do the medical assessment, and also do nutrition. And so as much as I take time to do that in medical visits, I've decided that I want somebody else to really hone in on that with them and work on recipes and stuff like that. So that way there's more of that focus, and they're getting those touch points every week, and it'll be in a 3-month package. So it's very intense. And then also, so it attracts people who are really serious too, because I get that, it's difficult for people to follow lifestyle change. That's why in the medical industry, there is this sort of, this is the disease and this is the medication. Medical doctors know that it's very hard for people to make behavioral change. So since they're not well versed in nutrition, they will say, okay, here's a dietitian that you can work with, and then, okay, I'll see you later. So a lot of times people will come to me and they're like, why did my medical doctor tell me this? Because there are certain things they're not trained to tell you, and they have to follow standard of care. And my standard of care is different because it also includes some of these other tools. So those are the tools that we use. So that's why I always tell people it's not us versus them, it's just skill set. Everybody has their own skill set and their own strengths. And so when you have certain conditions, you have to know, okay, this is what I need to do to get help with this. And so in our case, because we focus so much on diet and lifestyle as a treatment modality, I've decided to really hone in on that because I've seen so many differences in my patients. I've seen miracles happen, and that's not exaggerated. It is when people are able to have the strength and support to be able to make changes. You do see a lot of change in your patients. So I decided that that's what I'm going to do, and attract people who really want this healing, who really desire it. So many people don't know what a naturopathic doctor is. They don't know we exist. And I understand that because I didn't until I was in my mid-20s. So I don't expect that everybody understands, but I do want the word to spread because people need to know that they have additional options in healthcare. Like, we're here and we're trained and we have doctorates and we go through an in-house 4-year program. So it's not a game, it's serious. And we tend to be very passionate, but what I would say is we're not the best at marketing what we do. And we're so much smaller. We're a very small community. There's only 5,000 naturopathic physicians in North America. So that's including Canada. It's not just the United States.
5,000.
5,000. So we're small but mighty.
That's bananas. I was gonna ask you. So, is it okay to take questions? Like, if there's anybody watching?
Oh, absolutely.
Who has like a health question? This is not a medical whatever. Service,
yeah. It won't be medical advice, but absolutely.
Because I wanted to get more into the kind of trends you've seen, right? So you talked about
my God,
right? So you talked about miracles and seeing people, kind of transition their health and become healthier and heal longstanding issues. So I'm curious to hear more about what types of issues you've seen most commonly, especially among Black women.
Oh, yeah.
And then, what was the second part of that? Just like since the pandemic, like how that may have transitioned, if at all.
So, since you mentioned the pandemic, I'll start with that first. Obviously, more people dealing with anxiety, and I have a really strong referral base. Like, I've been creating this list since I moved to Connecticut of therapists that I can refer my patients to. Because I have a background in mental health as well. I used to be a mental health counselor. Another one of my life. That's why I say I have a million lives. But because of that, I'm very comfortable talking about mental health with patients, but also very aware when they need a therapist. And I'm not shy about this. I say this to everyone. Everyone needs a therapist. That's just my personal opinion. Life is just too challenging to act like, we don't need someone's assistance on that. So I'm very judicious in recommending therapists for my patients. So obviously a lot of anxiety. And when a patient's not in a good mental health space and you're asking them to make major changes, you're really asking for something that's almost impossible. So once they have the mental health piece that is being addressed, then you're more likely to have them follow the behavioral recommendations, the lifestyle recommendations, and the nutrition piece. So anxiety, depression, huge, still an issue. Currently, everybody's trying to figure out this new world outside of the pandemic. So saw a lot of that, still see a lot of that. My primary patients would be women with reproductive disorders. And I always say people learn about naturopathic doctors when all else fails. So we're usually not the first resort. But somehow when people start Googling and doing their research, they find out about us. And so I see everything, like literally I can't think of a condition that has not been I've been exposed to in practice. It's just with certain conditions, I've learned that I just don't want to treat that anymore.
Mm.
So I've, because it's like, I think also to get really good as a physician, you have to focus in on an area. So we're trained as primary care physicians, and depending on which state we practice in, we may be a specialist. So in Connecticut, I'm considered a specialist. In Arizona, where I'm also licensed, I can be primary care. So as a result, like I said, I saw everything. But during the pandemic in 2020, like I said, I honed in on women's health. So I see PCOS a lot,
Mm.
fibroid,
Mm.
endometriosis,
Mm.
thyroid disease. So I actually really enjoyed treating Hashimoto's. So I get a lot of patients with Hashimoto's, which is an autoimmunity, which is the cause of thyroid disease, specifically hypothyroidism. So those are the things, and also a lot of SIBO. So if you're not familiar with that, small intestinal bowel overgrowth, and that will present with a lot of digestive symptoms, a lot of bloating, constipation. So I see a lot of that too. And digestive health is very intrinsically linked with a lot of reproductive disorders as well. Even with endometriosis, there's a lot of new research coming out that shows that endometriosis is related to dysbiosis, which basically just means that you have an imbalance of good and bad bacteria in the gut.
Mm.
You know, so you have too much bad bacteria, and they've done some great research on endometriosis to show that it is not only is it a hormonal imbalance, but it also there is some immune function irregularity going on as well.
Mm.
So those are the
Wow.
main things that I treat. And like I said, that I'm good at treating and I enjoy
Mm.
treating. Probably the most difficult is fibroids. And as you talk about Black women, what I have found to work really well is this is where I always talk about integrative medicine. This is where natural medicine and conventional medicine have to work together, because we see a lot of research about fibroids talking about diet and lifestyle. And as of right now, we don't know what causes fibroids, but we do have research that shows that there's a genetic component. There is an inflammatory marker that seems to be more present in Black women that is kind of behind the scenes with fibroids. We also see that diet, especially in terms of inflammation, having inflammation does not help the fibroid situation. We see that women, as we get older, we're more prone to fibroids. So I think this is something I talk to a lot of my younger patients about. If you have a history of fibroids in your family
Mm.
and you are planning your family, if you know that it tends to be more aggressive, you might want to have children a little earlier than you had anticipated. You know, so there are some things there, you know, red meat and dairy can exacerbate fibroids. There's mixed research on soy. So a lot of people think, oh, you know, avoiding soy will definitely do it. Being a vegan will keep you from getting fibroids. And that's not really true. But definitely having a cleaner diet keeps the fibroids from being exacerbated, is what we've seen. And then there's some great research on green tea and some other supplements that can be beneficial for preventing fibroids. So when I say integrative, I have patients who come to me and they say, I don't want to have any surgery. But there may be a situation where you do need surgery. If your fibroids are very large, to have this expectation that they're going to shrink is not really a strong kind of
Plan.
yeah, it's just not. And so a lot of our women, a lot of Black women will be like, I'm not getting surgery no matter what. And it's not a good idea. I've seen fibroids get to the point where they're so large that, you know, your uterus has to be removed, a
So,
hysterectomy.
so let me ask you a question about that. So if your fibroids, if someone's fibroids, you know, they're moderate and they get a surgery, isn't it possible for the fibroids to return though once?
Absolutely, absolutely. And so that's why some women will say, well, there's no point, because they'll come back. Um, you know, I still think there's a point. I still think it's, yeah, because if you're trying to have children and you have fibroids, a huge cause of infertility. So I think how it should be planned, though, is women should get the surgery closer to the time that they're planning on having children. Because it's about a 7-year window. It can be sooner for some women. It's like 3 to 7 years where the fibroids can potentially come back. And that's kind of, like I said, it's just research. That's, you know, what's been in there. That doesn't mean that every woman will be like that. Somebody, it may be sooner, other people may be later. But because of that, it makes more sense to plan your surgery closer to the time you plan on having children. And unfortunately, you know, this is not to say, you know, we're in a very modern world now. So this is not to say if you're a woman in your 20s, you know, and you're not ready to have children, you're going to force yourself to have a child just because you have fibroids. That's not what I'm saying. It's just that I don't think there's enough discussion about family planning in general for Black women, and infertility is on the rise for us. We've always been taught that we're very fertile, but Black women are also the most educated demographic in this country, and we're also starting businesses more than anyone else. So that means we're busy. We're busy and we're creating, and that's a form of fertility, you know, on its own, right? It's not just being fertile with children, it's being fertile with ideas and creativity. So we're so busy being active and trying to create our careers and stepping up as the bosses we are, but we're not thinking about our fertility. And so I think that's why you see this trend happening, and we're having more open conversations about fertility, because we're so busy doing things, and sometimes fertility winds up being on the back burner. And
so many things I have to say about that.
so, and I understand that, you know, I totally understand that. I understand both sides of that. So, you know, that gets tricky, but I just don't think there's enough conversation about how you can use both worlds. You can have surgery and do your research on doctors who are not as invasive. There's lots of different surgeries now for fibroids where you don't have to just have a hysterectomy. And I think when you hear hysterectomy, that should be a red flag. You should be talking to medical doctors who are interested in preserving your fertility. And that should be the conversation, not just taking away your uterus. And then ask different doctors, have, you know, multiple, you know, referrals so that you can speak to people and make sure that you feel comfortable with the surgeon. But outside of that, in terms of natural medicine, naturopathic medicine, we're taking all these other things into account. We're also looking at acupuncture. Acupuncture is amazing for fibroid management, especially in terms of pain, and also managing the heavy bleeding that comes along with it. And so that's why we're also looking at supplementation and supplementing with iron. The more anemic you are, the more you're actually going to bleed, which is not something that people think about with fibroids. But yeah, it becomes more difficult as the longer you have the fibroids, you know, and so your anemia gets worse, you're fatigued, and a lot of women just push through as if everything's okay, but you're not. So there's many other issues with fibroids that affects your quality of life, and that's not how we should be living, you know. It's like that's not a quality of life to be bleeding so much that you're bleeding through your clothes and you think that that's normal. If you have a very heavy period, that's not normal. That means something's wrong. It could be cysts, it could be fibroids, it could be endometriosis, it could be adenomyosis. There's so many other factors that need to be considered. And so, like I said, I'm honing in on fibroids in particular because we're talking about Black women, we're talking about Black health, and it's something that affects us a lot. It's not just Black women. It also affects other women, you know, so, you know, other women of color.
Would you say that the rate of prevalence, or the prevalence of fibroids, is increasing across demographics?
I can't say that. I would just say with Black women, fibroids tend to come on sooner and they're more aggressive. But overall for women, because that's a great question. I don't know that I've seen research to say that, but I will say what's not helping us is being exposed to kind of like environmental toxins. That doesn't help the case either.
What kind of
So one just easy thing is just avoiding pesticides, because pesticides affect our hormones. So these are endotoxins that we're dealing with, and these things really disrupt the hormone disruptors. So chemicals, any chemical, so even perfumes, like we may love perfume, but there's chemicals in these things that are called xenoestrogens. And so xenoestrogens are just like foreign estrogens, and they're estrogen-like. So when they get in the body, they disrupt our estrogen levels. And with fibroids, what's seen is there's this delicate balance between estrogen and progesterone. So it's almost like estrogen is creating the fibroid and progesterone is holding them. You know, progesterone is really good when we're pregnant. That's what helps the baby, you know, be viable, honestly. And so when you don't have children, this is unfortunately why when women wait longer to have children, these hormones are still very active in your body, and you're not having a break from the hormones by having a child. So this delicate balance between the estrogen and progesterone, unfortunately, these hormones are very active in your body. Now you're adding on xenoestrogens, which makes the situation even more compounded, throwing off your hormonal imbalance even more. And so that is a relationship we also see with fibroids. And I'll never forget, a friend of mine had fibroid surgery like probably 10 years ago. And I remember when she had the surgery, the physician who performed her surgery said, you know, the uterus is waiting for something. And so if it's not a child, it's going to be a fibroid. And
So
that always
funny. I have to just jump in and say, a friend of mine, there's
always
like
stuck with me.
a proverb that says the exact same thing. Like, if you don't have babies, your body will create them for you.
Yeah, and so he was Nigerian, by the way, and that always stuck with me. You know, and I think about that when I'm working with patients who have fibroids, just, you know, and then also like what other things that we're dealing with emotionally that we're holding on to, because I do believe in that. I don't think that's woo-woo, you know. Sometimes, you know, people think whenever you talk about emotional strongholds, you know, people think that's like weird and out there. I don't believe that at all. I think all of that comes into play when we're talking about fertility, when we're talking about fibroids, when we're talking about any of these reproductive conditions. I think it's all part of that soup, you know, when we're talking about our you know, our womb.
Because it takes me so many things that you have said are just so connected. And I noticed that a lot of the people who joined our call were men, were Black men, right? I don't know if they're still on, but I'm curious to hear from your perspective so many things. Like, one, the role of Black men in Black women's health, right?
Wow.
Let's start there. You know, I could do this for hours, so we're gonna have to do a part two. But let's start there.
Hi, Yamani. I just want to say hi. Yamani is she joined, and I don't mean to put you on the spot, but she's a powerhouse in advocating for women and just the right to, you know, make a decision on whether they are pro-abortion. I know a lot of that gets really tricky with people depending on their beliefs, but she's been an advocate for women's rights and reproductive justice for a really long time. And we went to college together. So I just wanted to shout you out.
Hi, Desiree. I hope she's still with us. Yeah.
But the role of men is huge. So let's take fibroids, for instance. When you are dealing with fibroids as a woman, and we talked about things like bleeding, we talked about anemia, which means lower energy. When women have reproductive issues, usually also means they have low libido. So when a woman has a hysterectomy, her hormone balance is going to be thrown off even further in the body. So one thing that I talk to women a lot when they're like, I'm just tired of this, whatever condition it is, I'm just going to get a hysterectomy. When you are getting rid of your uterus and potentially ovaries, that means your hormonal balance is going to go down. Your estrogen is going to go down. And unfortunately, that's going to affect your libido, which means that your partner is involved, you know. So whether, you know, man, woman, whatever, your partner is going to be involved. So since we're talking about men here very specifically, when you're going through these issues, your partner has to understand what that means. you know, that means it may affect your libido, and things like reproductive disorders can affect marriages, can break up relationships, because you're dealing with something that is affecting your quality of life. It's going to affect your mood. And now hopefully you have a partner who's very supportive in that. So it does involve men, because men need to be present and hopefully supportive as you're making your decisions about your reproductive health. And there's nothing wrong with that. A lot of times as women, we'll say things like, you know, I don't need a man, or I can do it by myself. Of course we can do it by
Nope,
ourselves. Like, that's
we can't.
obvious,
I don't even believe that.
right?
I don't even believe that. Not
But
without
does that mean
wearing
you
ourselves
want to?
out.
Like, you can,
Mm-hmm.
right? In theory, but does that mean that's a good thing? Or what other things are falling by the wayside because you are doing it by yourself, right? And we already know we can't do everything, right? We can do certain things at certain times, but we can't do everything at the same time, right? So I do think we need support, and I do think that men need to be actively involved as women are dealing with these conditions, the same way a man is involved when you're having a child, when you're pregnant. It's not, you didn't get pregnant by yourself. So I do think that's important, and
So
you know, hopefully women have, you know,
that
that
kind
kind of
of support.
support.
What does it mean? Like, what does it mean for a partner to be supportive of someone who might be dealing with like a bad case of fibroids? Just spell it out for folks who might need.
Patience,
Mm-hmm.
patience.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, unfortunately, like I always joke with my husband that, you know, men don't necessarily have the best patience usually, but you know, just being supportive through that process. And even if you don't know what to say, just kind of like being a listening ear,
Mm-hmm.
just being there to listen. A lot of times you may not have a solution, but listening is huge. Just
Mm-hmm.
listening and being there, depending on the condition, going with them to their doctor's appointment so that you understand what it means. You know, this does affect fibroids specifically that we were talking about. It does affect the Black community, in that a lot of Black women are affected. So going back to stats for fibroids, 70 to 80% of women, all women before the age of 50, will develop fibroids. All women. The difference is, like I said, they're more aggressive in Black women, where it's more, it can go up to 90%, so 80 to 90%. So, but all women, and then the other issue is that some women may have fibroids but never know, because they don't cause any issues. So they can be tiny. They're just growths. They're benign growths in the uterus. So our body is always dividing cells, and thankfully with fibroids they're benign, but it's the same process with cancer. Cell division that's happening rapidly is cancer. But our body is constantly doing this. And so unfortunately, when I talked about environmental factors and all these other things that compound the situation, that makes you know, conditions turn into potentially cancer, this is all, like I always say, it's like a milieu. It's not one thing. But luckily fibroids are benign, but even in that they need to be investigated, because there is the rare case that it can turn cancerous. But for the most part they are benign. But it does affect all women. You know, it's just the levels of which it can intensify for certain groups, which tends to be the case for Black women.
Pretty badly. So when we talked earlier about anxiety and depression being like there's been a major surge since the pandemic, right, across the board. And you talked about how treating any condition is very dependent on the mental state of the patient, right? If they need to make behavioral changes, they need to be in at least, you know, a decent state of mind, right? I'm curious, it's probably gonna be my last question, because I have a whole last page of them since we've been talking, but you know,
I just looked at the time. Oh my God, it
we gotta
flew.
wrap up, right?
Yeah.
But so just connecting, like, so we've talked about Black men being supportive and patient, and just, you know, a listening ear, because I can see how that connects to mental health for somebody who's in a relationship, right? The mental health now of the patient being connected to how the cycles of behavior. How do you treat because you talk about like referring people to to therapists. Is that the primary way that mental health issues can be treated naturally, or are there other, like, of course, sleep and diet and exercise, right? But are there herbal remedies that you've seen to be very effective? Are there other sort of, um,
Yeah. I
approaches?
see where you're
And
going. I see where you're
we
going.
we gonna schedule part two.
I,
I'm gonna get
I
on your
see where
calendar
you're
right
going. So what we look at as naturopathic doctors is a lot that we talk a lot about adrenal function. And so your adrenal glands are tiny little glands that are right by your kidneys. And when we talk about things like adrenaline, right? Everybody knows adrenaline. So there's hormones like adrenaline. We also talk about cortisol. And so the body, when we're stressed, are pumping out all these hormones. And there comes a point, conventional medicine doesn't really lean into adrenal fatigue. They think we're like making it up, but it's very real. And so what happens is, because it makes logical sense, right? If your body is pumping out all these hormones that are generally the hormones that are fight or flight hormones, that's not supposed to happen. We need a balance. So our body protects us by pumping out these hormones because it's saying, hey, there's danger. So I need these hormones now so that we know, and then the body tries to find its homeostasis, but we're not supposed to be in fight or flight all the time. So what happens is a lot of us are in that. And so that is affecting anxiety. It is affecting depression. So one of the things that I look at is adrenal fatigue, and I'm looking at hormone levels by checking them. And you can check them in the blood. You can do with cortisol. You can do a salivary test for that. So that just means you're just using your spit, and you look at what these levels are. And so cortisol is supposed to be low at night and higher in the daytime to get you through your day. And what happens with people when they're stressed out is that their cortisol levels tend to be higher at night, which makes it more difficult to sleep. So even though they're tired, their cortisol is imbalanced. And then that also can lead to weight gain, because when cortisol is really high, that's the hormone, when you see little commercials and things like that, leads to the big gut. So, all of that we're looking at. So we're looking at the hormonal imbalances and how they're interacting. But then also you mentioned supplements. So right now, when you mentioned also something about trends, so I'm trying to pull it all together. Ashwagandha is really hot right now. And the irony is that's my favorite herb in the whole wide world. And I discovered it when I was in medical school because it's very gentle and it's an adaptogen, which means that it can naturally modulate if you're too high here or too low here. It works with the body, and it's an Ayurvedic herb, which I'm also very passionate about those herbs because of my background in yoga and spending time in India. And so I love Ayurveda and the whole philosophy behind it. But ashwagandha is hot right now, and ashwagandha is actually very helpful with managing a lot of stress and calming that down. And it's also been more popular lately in discussions about libido. But like I said, it's an adaptogenic herb, so it's very gentle, and obviously you need to understand dosing. So go see a naturopathic doctor to understand the dosing. But it's very gentle, and it doesn't really have any contraindications with medication. So I do love ashwagandha. Saffron is also an herb, and it's used in cooking. In the Middle East is very popular there, but it's been studied for depression. And what I find works really well is, along with seeing a therapist and getting to the root of those things and exploring different therapies like cognitive behavioral therapy and EMDR and all those kinds of things, I think are really helpful. But it's also great to take something that's supportive of the body. Also looking at nutritional deficiencies. Being anemic also can affect your mood. One of the signs of anemia is mood changes, hormonal changes, there's mood changes. So it's also good to look at things like iron, look at zinc. There's some great new studies talking about how zinc affects libido. So that's important to look at. Zinc obviously is helpful for your immune system. So looking at potential nutritional deficiencies along with herbs that can be supportive are really helpful in terms of mood, which you talked about. And magnesium is considered, it's a mineral, but it's also a cofactor for many processes in the body. So if you're low in magnesium now, you're going to suffer. And some of the signs of that is like jitteriness, restless leg syndrome, which lots of people have. So, and then issues with sleep. Magnesium can be really helpful for sleep. Glycine is one of my favorites. Since you mentioned sleep, I love glycine for really difficult patients who have issues with sleep. Also, patients who are menopausal, glycine is really great for that. And some people go into menopause earlier because of a hysterectomy. So things like that are what I look at, like you said, with the sleep and the supplements for sleep, supplements helping with hormonal imbalance, and the supplements that are helping with mood.
Wow. So how can people work with you? I know you're talking about transitioning into packages. I know you said you're back to seeing patients, but you're probably backed up to January. How can people work with you if they need some support?
It's pretty easy. Our phone number is 203-806-5152. My practice is called Gentle Nature Health, and we're totally virtual. You can also email us at admin@gentlinature.com. But if you just Google me online, Dr. Jennifer Pierre, you'll find all my information and the practice. And and it's not hard. I just think that what I always tell people is evaluate what is a good time in your life to focus on your health. Unfortunately, our health is like at the back burner, but it should be primary. But look at your life, and a lot of people say things like, I don't have time, I don't have time, I don't have time. And what I challenge people to say is, you don't have time for your health. This doesn't mean that you have hours, but you don't have any time every day to devote to your health. And I've questioned myself with that. I am in January, I started a really much more aggressive fitness routine. Something I hadn't done since my 20s. And I challenged myself, do you not have space in your life to include fitness in a way that's really important? And, it was hard. It was hard, but it has changed me for the better. And it allows me to really tap back into how my patients are when they're dealing with challenging health changes in their lives, like how to make those changes. And every day you have to do it. We joke with fitness, it's not like you can work out for 3 months and then you never have to do it for the rest of your life. You have to keep doing it. And so every day, I'm at 4 to 5 days a week working out. Every time I go, I have to psych myself into working out. I have to say, okay, this is a priority. So prioritize your health. And even if it's not me, it doesn't have to be me. You have to find a doctor that you feel like you relate to. But challenge yourself in asking, am I making my health a priority? And am I looking for providers who are really getting to the root of my condition? And if not, look for them.
Please call Dr. Pierre. She's not actually booked until January. I'm sure you'll get something before.
I'm not. I actually, when you mentioned self-care, I actually took some time off this summer to really, hone in on my self-care, and as a result, redefining how I see patients, my scheduling, everything. So I'm not backed up yet, but when I really lean into this marketing that I've been focused on, that's been my main priority, is to really market the practice. It's going to get crazy, but I had to kind of step back before I could come back into it again. So
thank you so much for joining us. For those of you watching, I hope that you got something out of this. I trust you got a lot, because I know I got a lot out of this. We're just grateful for you, Dr. Pierre, for sharing your wisdom and your knowledge and your experience. If you
Of
enjoy,
course.
you want more of this type of content, go to noirpress.org/join to join our community, our mailing list. If you want to support this work, put a little change in the bucket. There's a fundraiser on the Noirpress page. You can go to labs.org/support. A lot of different ways that you can get involved. Portalx.space to learn more about our upcoming platform, the new Facebook, but with beauty and a conscience. We love you. We appreciate you for watching and being part of this community, and we'll see you very soon. Peace.
Bye.
Bye.